Lee.
Lee? Okay, so we're gonna. So today is October 8th. Today's October 8th, 2008.
8th or 9th?
8th. Today's October 8th, 2018. We're at the home of Leon Lee Silverman. And hold on, let me just, every time you move, I'm gonna have to just do a little of that so get comfortable. Okay. Today we're gonna talk to you about your participation in Machal, but before we get to that, Lee, tell me where you were born, what kind of household you were brought up in, and a little bit about your family background.
I was born in Detroit, but grew up in Cleveland. Most of the time with my grandparents, because my mother was sick quite a bit. She had tuberculosis. My grandparents were religious, and my parents were totally secular. So it was a divided, and I had a lot of anti-Semitism growing up.
Cleveland? In
Cleveland. Why? Because though I lived in the only section of Cleveland that was multi-ethnic.
Okay, so you had like Poles and Jews.
Everything. And so at times I would come in contact with some who were very anti-Semitic. And anti-Semitic was not a rarity in the 30s.
About anti-Semitism in Cleveland. What neighborhood did you grow up in?
On Kinsman, on the east side. The Jewish population in Cleveland was centered in two areas. One called 105th, and the other the Kinsman area. And I grew up in the Kinsman area, which was, as I said, the only multi-ethnic area in the city, because every other part of the city had its own ethnicity. So it was an experience because I got to know a number of different cultures.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Yeah, a good example was on a Friday night walking home, on the street, I smelled all the different cultures, what they were baking and eating. By the time I got home, I had tremendous appetite.
What about your father?
My father was from a very famous city called Kishinev.
Wow.
Famous because it had, I think, the 1904 pogrom. My mother was from Western Poland.
From Western Poland, okay, near the German border.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they met in the United States?
Right, they met in the U.S. My mother and her mother had attempted to come to the States just as World War I broke out.
Right.
And weren't able to come. And my grandfather, my mother's father, had come before the war. He'd come in the early 1900s. He came so that he could save enough money to bring the family.
Which was totally normal at the time. That's how it worked.
Right. Yeah, they didn't know about illegal immigration in those days.
No.
So unfortunately, by the time he saved enough money and sent it to them, the war broke out, so they were stuck in Poland during World War I.
And that was Western Poland. Were a lot of battles going on. That was the Russian-German front. Right. That was, yeah. And what about your father? When did he come to the United States?
He came to the States after World War I as well.
Did he ever talk about the pogroms in Kishinev?
No, never did. He was very young. He was only, he wasn't even 4 years old when the pogroms occurred. Yeah. So, but he never.
And what were your parents doing in Detroit?
My father was a painter, a house painter, and he couldn't get work in Cleveland, and he'd heard that there was work available in Detroit. They went to Detroit. Unfortunately, the same situation was there, and I was born there, but after 2 or 3 months, they returned to Cleveland.
They returned to Cleveland. And are you the oldest child?
Yes, I have one sister
Younger.
who's 7.5 years younger.
Okay, so you're the oldest child in the family.
Right.
Now, growing up in Cleveland, you said that you grew up with your grandparents. Did they live in the same house as you, or live nearby?
Both.
Both.
At one time we lived in the same house. Then my father was able to buy a house and move there.
Yeah.
And growing up, I was not very Zionistic. In fact, my main interests were sports and girls.
You know.
I was a normal kid.
So what sports are you enjoying when you're a child? When you're a teenager?
Baseball, softball, basketball.
Which, of course, being in sports accompanied you your whole life till today.
Right.
You just play tennis today.
Right.
Correct?
I just came from the courts.
You're 92 years old? 91?
No, only 91.
Sorry, 91. 91 years old. Okay, so we're having a lot of this light drop. Okay. We're going to try and do something here.
You can't get enough light?
I can't get enough light in here. It's a problem for me, but we're going to do the best we can. Do the best we can with the tools we have. Correct?
Right.
So, you're a Cleveland Indians fan? You're
Actually, I was always a Detroit Tiger fan.
Really?
Really. In fact, it is a coincidence. When I moved out here, I became very close friends with one of the fellows who played for Detroit before the war. His name is Murray Franklin.
Okay.
And he was with Detroit when they had Hank Greenberg. And I don't remember the name of the catcher who was also Jewish.
Mickey Cochran.
Mickey Cochran was not Jewish.
No.
I don't remember. But anyway.
Well, Hank Greenberg is, a legend. What was your friend's name? Franklin?
Murray Franklin.
What position did he play?
Shortstop, second, third base.
Really? So the Tigers had 2 Jews on the team at that time?
3.
3. And the catcher, which I can't figure.
Can't remember his name.
We'll figure that out.
And it was through Murray that I met Hank Greenberg out here.
Hold on. We're gonna. Okay. So, you're a Tigers fan.
Yeah, I was always a Tigers fan.
Why?
Because I was born there.
Okay. Okay. So growing up,
And they were always a better team than the Indians.
I agree with you. I'm a Tigers fan as well. So you grew up in a house, not very Zionistic.
That's right.
Jewish though. On
Yes.
holidays.
Very Jewish, especially with my grandparents.
With your grandparents. They were religious.
Right.
But they weren't Zionists necessarily.
No.
They were just religious.
Right.
And you say that you grew up in Cleveland, you had to deal with a lot of anti-Semitism. Can you elaborate on that? Can you get into it? Because I'm sure it affected you.
Yeah, it did affect me because it made me much more aware of being Jewish.
Uh-huh.
And it made me more combative. And it was a learning experience, but it wasn't nearly as bad as when I went into the Navy.
Well, we'll talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Kids would call you dirty Jew. Were there fist fights? Was it like when?
A lot of fist fights.
Yeah.
I was a battler. Got in a lot of fights. In fact, for a while, my nickname was Scrappy.
Why?
Because I was always in scraps.
With scraps.
Scraps are fights.
Fights.
You don't know what scrappy is. Boy, that's an old term.
Scrappy. And does the word Palestine even come up in your house when you're a child?
Not very often.
No.
Only when My grandfather would read the foreword.
Okay, the forward, sure, and?
So that's really what polished my Yiddish, was reading the foreword.
Can you just tell me what the forward is, just for the record?
The foreword is a Jewish publication that came out of New York and went all over the country.
In Yiddish?
In Yiddish.
And it was mostly like mainstream Zionistic, or it was just...
Not Zionistic, but once in a while there'd be some articles about Palestine.
About Palestine. Okay. And of course you have a bar mitzvah. I mean, you do those things.
Yes, I had a bar
synagogue
mitzvah.
sometimes, high holidays.
Oh, I always went every Shabbat with my grandfather.
Really? What was your grandfather's name?
Ben Crystal.
Crystal. And they were from Poland, right?
Right, they were from Western
Your
Poland.
mother's parents.
From a little shtetl called Kolna.
Kolna. Okay. Now, do you go to public school, of course?
Yes.
Right? Do you go to Sunday school?
No.
No. No Sunday school. And did you belong to any Jewish youth movement as a child? Or?
None at all.
None at all.
None at all. Didn't even belong to AZA.
Okay. Nothing.
Nothing.
Just playing ball.
Just
chasing-
played ball
chasing
all the
girls.
time. Yeah, sometimes chasing, sometimes not chasing.
I got you. And so when you graduate high school, it's 1945.
5. Yeah, I actually.
So let's actually go back a little. Of course, you know, when you're in height and like, 13, 14 years old, I mean, you guys are reading about what's happening in Europe and Kristallnacht and the Nuremberg laws and, you guys.
It didn't get a lot of publicity.
Okay.
There's far more publicity about Kristallnacht and the Nuremberg laws today than there was in the 30s. Because the U.S., for the main part, was an isolationist country.
Sure. And when you're 18, when do you finish high school?
And I was 17 when I graduated, but I enlisted in the Navy during my senior
Year in high school.
year.
Why
in
the
high-
Navy?
Because they'd opened up the pilot training program, and I wanted to be a pilot. So I think I enlisted in February or March of 45. And when I went down to downtown Cleveland and took the physical and mental exams, and they told me, number one, I'd have to have my parents' approval, because I was only 17. And second, that after that, I would have to go to Detroit to take the final exams. But I'd have to be sworn in. So I was sworn in, which put me on 24-hour call. I was on call February, March, April, May, June. Finally, in the end, near the end of July, they called me, but not to go to Detroit, but to go to boot camp at Sampson, New York. So I went to boot camp. I was not a happy sailor because I'd have preferred, if I couldn't get into the pilot training school,
Yeah, you were going to go into the Navy.
I had potential scholarships, basketball scholarships.
Okay.
So I could have gotten a couple years of college in.
Yeah.
But, so I went in the Navy, and sure enough, a month after I got in the Navy, the war ended.
September 45.
Yeah, the end of August. And it was chaos. They didn't know what to do with us. Instead of 6 weeks of boot camp, I had 12 weeks of boot camp. And from boot camp, after my home leave, they sent me to Great Lakes, to the schools there. So I was in a course called School Keeper Dispersing Course. And on the way to Great Lakes, I caught pneumonia. And I was in the barracks. The next morning, I couldn't get out of bed. And the fellows carried me to sick bay for sick call. And they propped me up in a corner. And the sick call went on. No one came to get me. So when it was finished, they see this one schlepper sitting and propped up in the corner, and they came over, and I told them I wasn't able to move. So the doctor came and he diagnosed me as having pharyngitis.
What's that?
Which is an inflammation of the pharynx. And they put me in sick bay. And I was in sick bay 2 weeks, couldn't get out of bed. Guys brought me food. And then we had a captain's inspection. And when the captain came to my bed and listened to my chest, he yelled, "Get this guy to the hospital and put him in an oxygen tent." I had pneumonia. And that's when they first discovered I had pneumonia. So I was in the hospital. And I remember it was during Thanksgiving that I was in the hospital, and they kept telling us what a terrific Thanksgiving meal we're going to get. And what happened was they forgot to order food on my ward, so they gave us a tray of nuts. And that was the Thanksgiving dinner. Well, the story gets worse. After the hospital, I went into the storekeeper dispersing course. And they told us the top 10% can pick whatever duty assignment they want. Well, all the other guys in my course were guys that had been in the Navy training courses, which they had closed. So they shipped them all to Great Lakes. So I had like 5,000 guys in my course. And they were playboys. They didn't know anything about curfews or anything. I graduated first in the course, which was no accomplishment because most of the others didn't even take the test. And I told them I wanted to go to BUSANDA, Bureau of Supplies and Accounts, in Cleveland. So I cleaned barracks for 2 months instead of going to Cleveland. And after cleaning barracks for 2 months, they sent me to Lido Beach Separation Center on Long Island. I was ship's company there. I mess cooked there for 60 days, and then I drove trucks and buses. Well, came beginning of August of '46, they said, you have a choice. You can either sign up in the inactive reserve for 4 years, or we'll put you on a ship that's going to the Bikini Atoll tests. You know what those are? They were testing the atom bombs there. So I immediately signed up for the inactive reserve. While I was in, my family had moved from Cleveland to Los Angeles.
Why?
My mother had tuberculosis, and the doctors told her the climate would kill her. So they moved to California, and fortunately they sent me the address. So I came out here, and I arrived the day after registration closed at UCLA. So I had to wait for the February semester.
So what did you do in the meantime?
Well, I had a cousin who was married to a guy who was an electrician. And he said, if you want to be an electrician's apprentice and learn the trade, work with me until you get to UCLA. So I said, okay. Now, at that time, there was what they called the 5220 Club. Veterans could get unemployment insurance for 52 weeks at $20 a week. But instead of doing that, I decided I'd be an electrician's apprentice. That worked. Now, I worked 40 hours as an electrician's apprentice, and my pay at the end of the week was $30. So instead of getting unemployment for $20, I worked 40 hours for $30. So I was not what you'd call brilliant. Anyway, about 6 weeks after working, my cousin's husband was a very big, heavy guy. Well, part of the job of an electrician is what they call strapping the wires underneath the house. So one day I'm strapping the wires underneath the house, and as you're doing this, your muscles expand. Couldn't get out of the house. So I was stuck under the house. And trying to wrench myself out, I wrenched my shoulder. After just laying there for about 10 minutes, I was able to get out, but my shoulder couldn't move my left arm. Took off my belt with the tools, gave it to my cousin's husband and said, I've just completed my career as an electrician's apprentice. That was my last thing. Well,
you finally do get into UCLA.
Yeah, I did get into UCLA in the February semester. Later that year, my mother grew up in Poland. One of the fellows she grew up with lived in Palestine. In fact, his brother was very well known. He was Jabotinsky's editor of the newspaper. Remba was his name. Well, the brother had two sons. One son he sent over to LA to study at UCLA.
The father's in Poland?
No, the father's in Palestine.
And this is a guy that grew up with your mother.
You're right.
Right?
He sends his son.
He sends one son to UCLA.
To California. And he stayed in our home.
Okay, do you remember his name?
Oded Remba.
Oded Remba, that's his name?
Yeah.
So he stays with you guys.
Right.
You're going to UCLA.
I'm going to UCLA.
Do you guys become friends?
Yes, well, he wasn't, personally, he didn't have a very nice character, but he regaled me with all the stories of what was going on in Palestine, with the Haganah, with the Etzel, with the Stern Gang. So I was fascinated. Though I never had any association with any Zionist group, I was fascinated by these stories.
After the Holocaust.
Right, and I knew about the Holocaust.
Oh, of course not. It's post-World War II.
Well, it didn't get a lot of publicity. Anyway, so I said, well, that sounds fascinating. So I said, how do I go? And he told me there's an organization called Land in Labor for Palestine. And the propaganda they put out was that if you join Land in Labor and go to Israel, Palestine still, then you'll replace someone who is going into the army. That's what you call a supurei safta, or in Yiddish known as a Bubbemeise.
Or bullshit.
Yeah, that too. So I was interested, and so they made the arrangements for me to meet the people in Beverly Hills who were involved. So I went there, and they sent me to a doctor, get all the shots and everything, and they said, okay, we'll call you. So this is about May of 48.
48.
48.
So the UN has already proclaimed the partition?
No. Yeah, at the end of April. Yeah.
And it's right before Israel declares independence.
That's right. Okay. So I signed up, and they said, okay, we'll send you. A month goes by, I don't hear anything. So I went to Land and Labor in Beverly Hills, and I said, look, as long as you're going to send me, I want to go to Cleveland, because I know a lot of people there who were in the service, guys I'd grown up with, and I'd see if I can recruit any of them. So they said, sure, we'll let you. I told them where I would be in Cleveland. I was staying with a cousin, and I said, okay, we'll let you know. Went to Cleveland, contacted the Land and Labor representative there, talked to him. He said, I'll give you a list of all of the Cleveland natives who were in the Air Force. Call them and see if you can get any of them to volunteer. I guess the list had about 40, 45 names. So I called. Must have called 30 of them. Not one was interested in going over. Well, you can understand that they were either starting careers or going to college or involved in jobs. Hello? Yes, who is this? Oh, Aaron? LA Philharmonic has a section they call Veterans Circle, and they provide free tickets to veterans for the operas.
Nice.
So there's one opera this Saturday, but no one wants to go to it. So if I go, I'll go along.
So back to pilots, the Cleveland Jewish pilots.
No one couldn't get a single one. And I stayed in Cleveland about a month and a half.
What about school, though?
I had dropped out of school because I thought I'd be leaving soon.
By the way, what did you enroll in? What major?
In business administration.
Okay. So you're in Cleveland. You can't get any of these guys to join.
So after 6 weeks, I decided I'd come back to LA. So I returned to LA, and about a week after I returned, they called me to go to New York. So I went to New York to the Land and Labor Office.
Where was that?
It was in Manhattan. I don't remember the exact.
14th Street?
Really don't remember.
Okay. So you go to the office.
Wherever Land and Labor was, that's where I went. So I went there, and they said, well, you're sailing in a few days on a Dutch ship, the New Amsterdam, going to Europe, and there'll be 6 of you. Yeah,
I think 8.
8 of us, that's right. There were 6 religious in the group, and they said, please be very innocuous. Don't raise any attention, and certainly don't say what you're going for or anything like that.
Now, is the New Amsterdam, is it like a cruise liner with
That's what it was.
A lot of other passengers?
And there weren't a lot of other passengers because by this time it was late summer.
And but it's a commercial ship.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was the biggest Dutch cruise ship.
And where does this ship land in Europe?
Le Havre.
Where?
Le Havre.
That's
northern France. Le Havre, it's a big port in France. So we sailed on the Le Havre, and there were 3 of us in one cabin. 3 of the 8 of us were in one cabin. And one guy's name I can't remember. His name was Rudy, but his last name I don't forget. And he was an Austrian. I mean, he was really an Austrian with the leather shorts and the lederhosen. Yeah, he was a hell of a nice guy. And the 3rd guy was Ehringer, Jack Ehringer, from New York. And 3 of us got along together very well. We couldn't have been more varied in our backgrounds. So we sailed, landed in Le Havre, and we were met by a representative from Israel. He said, okay, we're going on a train, we're going to Paris. I thought, great, we're going to spend some time in Paris. So the train went to Paris. We went from one train station to another train station, boom, down to Marseille. And from Marseille, we went to a DP camp called Saint Jerome. Yeah. And we were there for, several weeks.
So this is after Israel has declared
Yeah.
independence.
This is like late summer, early
September.
yeah.
The war is going on in Palestine and Israel. You guys want to get there.
Right. So we're there about 6 weeks, and what we were doing was getting families together.
How was that experience of seeing Holocaust survivors for the first time? I mean,
It was quite an experience because everyone I met had a story, and I was able to converse with all of them because I was fairly fluent in Yiddish. It was quite an experience.
Can you tell me about that experience?
Yeah, because these people who survived, they were survivors, but there was not really a spark of life.
They were like just Walking Dead.
Well, not exactly that bad, but
you know,
there was something missing. Yeah, there was something missing. But when they got to the DP camp, part of it changed. We used to sing Yiddish songs at night and exchange stories. And the stories I heard were mind-wrenching because they'd all survived. And most of them had survived the camps. So it was quite an experience. Well, after 6 weeks, we said, look, we want to get to Israel. So we went into Marseille to see the Israeli consul there. And we said, look, we're here 6 weeks, we want to get there. So he said, fine, we'll put you on a TWA plane leaving on this weekend for Tel Aviv. Great. The weekend came, no one picked us up. Monday we went back into the consulate. He said, what happened? We asked, what happened? He said, well, we had you booked on this plane, but Truman had issued an embargo against any Americans going to Israel.
And fighting.
Well, just going, whatever it was, they couldn't go. So, but he said, there's a ship. It's actually, he said a ship, but it wasn't a ship. He said, there's a ship leaving in a couple of days. We'll put you on that. So a couple days later, trucks came, and we went on the truck to another DP camp called Grand Arnes. This was a real central place. This is where all of them came to Grand Arnes. And there were 400 of us. There were 10 trucks. And they took us to the coast. And then they dropped us off, not far from Toulon, I think it was. And they said, walk along the beach.
And you guys are with 400 DPs?
Yes. Walk along the beach, and you'll see a man there. And they gave us each a slip of paper with a name on it. Give it to the man, and go aboard the ship. And we walked and walked and walked and walked, and we were getting pretty tired. And all of a sudden, there on the beach is a little table with a candle on it, and a guy sitting there. And we went and gave him the name. Now this is the dead night, not a light anywhere. And we see this gangplank going to it wasn't a ship, it was a boat. And we go aboard, and they tell us the youngest ones go to the bottom, and the oldest ones stay on top. 'Cause the ship had formerly been a coastwise trading schooner. I don't think it had ever left sight of land. And we had an Italian crew. I think there were 3 of them. And we go aboard the boat. I went down to the bottom level, and the boat takes off. And after it starts pitching and yawing, the older people on top got sick. And they vomited, and it went down to the bottom. That was the only night that I slept on that bunk. I slept on the deck the rest of the trip.
I understand that you had an interesting trip.
That's what I'm getting into now. And we're sailing. About the 3rd day out, there were 2 crews, an Italian crew that did the sailing of the ship, and an Israeli crew who was a captain, first mate, and a radio operator, girl. About the 3rd day out, we hit a storm. I mean a storm. I went to the fantail of the ship, looked straight up into the waves, and the ship is filling with water. The pump is not working. And the water level is getting higher and higher. And the waves are coming over. The storm is in its fury. We decide, with the pumps not working and the ship filling up, got abandoned ship. First we sent out SOSs. No response. So we said, if we're going to have to abandon ship or go down with it, there's one lifeboat. We get to the lifeboat, it's full. Well, I have to tell you the complement of the 400 people. About 350 were North Africans, or North African Jews, primarily from Morocco.
Yep.
And there were a dozen of us Machalniks. And there were 35 assorted Eastern Europeans who had survived. We get to the lifeboat, it's filled with the 35 Europeans because they were survivors. And the North Africans are shouting, "Save the children, save the children." We look at the boat, it's not seaworthy. If we put the boat in, it had gone right down. That's where I learned the word nes. Miracle. The storm went by us, past us. We spent the next 2 days fixing the pump and pumping the water out of the boat. And we proceeded. And after a couple of days, we ran out of food, because I think they only intended food for about 6 or 7 days. We're already in the 10th day.
What was the name of the ship again?
Mishmar HaEmek.
Mishmar Emek.
Hello? Tim, listen, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back in about an hour? Okay. Talk to you later. Bye.
So you're pumping out the water. You're running out of food.
We already pumped the water out, got the pumps working, and we're proceeding. Lo and behold, one of the Romanian guys gets caught with one of the Moroccan girls. Now, this is a serious thing. The Moroccans want to kill the guy. the Israeli captain solved the problem. We had a wedding. He performed a wedding on the ship, on the boat. And that was the only time the two groups ever got together.
The 350 and the 35.
Yeah.
How was that experience? How was it?
They got married. He married them as the captain. He married them, and I think the wedding lasted 1 or 2 days after we reached Haifa, because the Moroccans went to the north, and the Europeans went to the south. Well, after the wedding, of course, there wasn't hardly any food. We continue sailing. And as we get near Crete, as we're passing Crete, another storm hits us. And this time the engine stops. And when the engine stops, the Italian captain faints from fright because the storm is pushing us to the rocks that surround Crete. And there's no power. You can't do anything. Second nest, we're not 100 meters from the rocks, and the storm goes by us. So the Israeli captain gets off, takes the boat, the lifeboat which had been repaired, goes ashore, and comes back with 6 mountain goats. We're gonna eat the mountain goats because we're still a few days from Haifa. So the next day, we get the galley ready. Now the galley hasn't been used for more than a week. And they start to fire up the galley while all the old grease that had accumulated catches fire. And the galley is ablaze. So we had to cut the galley off the deck and throw it in the sea. Never ate the mountain goats. Well,
sounds like a trip from hell.
We finally get into Haifa. No,
if I were you, I'd kiss the ground.
I hadn't bathed in, 18 days. I took off all my clothes. I walked off the boat in my birthday suit. We went into a big, not a hangar, a huge building where they sprayed us with DDT, gave me a uniform to put on. And that was my arrival in Israel.
Probably one of the best showers you ever took in your life.
Who took a shower?
Oh, you didn't take a shower? No?
Not until we got to the base. I think we were in Atlid that night. And the next morning, by then our group was complete. We get there, and we're in Atlid. They say, okay, you're going to have a physical now. One of the guys in my group had a glass eye, and we were worried that he wouldn't pass the physical. And after all we'd been through, we were like a tight-knit group.
Yeah.
We were worried that he wouldn't pass the physical and send him home. So they put us in a room, and the doctor comes in, and he said, okay, there's a chalk line on the floor. Walk up to that line and stand on your toes. We were all able to do that. We all passed the physical.
That was it?
That was it. That was the physical. So then, from Atlid, I went to Tel HaShomer.
Televinsky.
Which was Televinsky at the time. Yeah. And I was there several days, and one day a guy comes around from the...
What are we talking about? October, November?
No, it's by this
September,
time...
end of September.
End of September. By this time, he says, it might have been end of September, because there was 18 days on the ship and 6 weeks at the DP camp, and time. So he's looking for people who can drive, because he wants, I forget that's Tom Tugend's unit. He was the commander of Tom Tugend's unit. He says, who can drive? I said, I can drive. So he said, good, I'll come for you on Monday. I'll take you down to our base. Okay. This is like Thursday. So one of the guys I got to know at Televinsky says, I'm going into Tel Aviv to see some friends of mine from Calgary. And would you like to come with me? I said, sure, I don't want to stay on the base all weekend. So we went into Tel Aviv. We're at the Imperial Hotel. The guys have a room at the Imperial Hotel, and they're in the Air Force. One of them was a photographer, Yale Jaffe. He was an aerial photographer. So we're in the room, and we're having fun and talking and everything. And I decide I'm going to take a walk on Yarkon Street. So I go out of the Imperial Hotel. At that time, there was the Yarkon Hotel right across the street, which is now a parking lot. And as I'm walking by, a guy comes running down the steps, runs into me, knocks me down. We're both on the ground looking at each other. It's a fraternity brother of mine from UCLA. He was a Sabra, though. His name is Herb Frieden. He says, what are you doing here? And I told him. He said, come with me. He takes me into the Yarkon Hotel, which was Air Force headquarters.
Right.
And he gets me into Modi'in, intelligence. He gave him a cock and bull story about my background. I mean, this guy had a fantastic imagination.
Creative.
Yeah, creative. So that's how I got into the Air Force in intelligence there.
What was your job?
I worked in the office.
At the Imperial Hotel?
At the Imperial Hotel.
At the Yarkon Hotel?
Yeah, I mean at the Yarkon, and they billeted me at the Imperial Hotel.
They what? They put you in a room
And
there?
won a room at the...
Perfect.
Yeah.
And isn't the Machal Club around there also?
Yeah, there was a club further down the street.
Right.
That's where I ate my meals. And the meals consisted of tea and cookies.
So what's your job?
Well, I was assisting in the administrative office, which was a nothing job.
No.
And then the headquarters moved to Jaffa, to Machane Ariel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when we moved there, they assigned me to a guy by the name of Leon Agris.
Okay.
And what we were doing is, he paid the Machalniks.
What do you mean he paid them?
He was like a paymaster.
But the Machal people are volunteers.
Not all of the Air Force people.
Okay.
The crews
The crews, okay.
were not.
Yeah.
So what I did was, I kept the records of all of the flights of the fighter planes, the transport planes. Every day I'd get a report from each squadron telling me who flew, where flew, the tonnage dropped and all that. And I kept the records of that. And it was amusing. Agris was hard of hearing.
Leon?
Leon.
Yeah.
He had a hearing aid. But he never had any money. So guys would come, were told to come to report to him to get money. And they'd come in, he'd say, I don't have any money. And they start yelling. He would turn it off. He'd sit there and smile. And the guy would yell at him for 5-10 minutes. And finally he yelled himself out and he'd leave. Akers would say, what did they say? You know?
Where was he from?
Philadelphia. Yeah. We're two Leons, sir. I was a Leon, he was a Leon. So then the war ended.
Yeah.
January 7th, I think it was, when we shot down the 5 British planes.
Can you tell me about that?
Well, I really don't know much about it. In the morning, 2 were shot down, and then in the afternoon they shot down 2 more, and 1 was shot down by ground fire. And the Egyptians sued for...
And these were British pilots fighting with the Egyptian army.
And the amazing thing is, 1 of the Israeli pilots had been in that squadron during the war.
In the RAF?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember his name? No.
No, I don't remember his
Exactly.
name now. But that was an amazing
So
fact.
it's a fact that there were British pilots fighting with the Egyptians.
Well, they said they were only doing reconnaissance.
It's
Yeah, that's why they were shot down.
and when the war of Independence ends in '49, I can't remember which month. I think it's March '49.
Well, the hostilities ended in January 7th when those British planes were. But when they finally got to Beersheba,
Or
Eilat, I mean, that was in around March.
March, right? '49.
Yeah, so right after that, the IDF decided they're going to have a national basketball tournament. And they had each unit of the IDF send a team. I think the tournament was at Sarafat.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, my memory. So we played the tournament at Sarafat. The Air Force team, 1 guy was from Boston, another from Philadelphia, I was from LA, the center was from Toronto, and the 5th was an Israeli. We ran away with the tournament. No team came close to us.
It's so funny that basketball, because that wasn't a big sport in Israel at the
Yes, it was.
Was it really?
It was.
Yeah.
Not nearly as big as soccer,
Right.
but basketball was big.
Really?
Yeah, there were many teams throughout the country. And in the kibbutzim they played. So anyway, the IDF thought we were such a great team, they invited the American Marines, who had a team in Jerusalem, to come and play us. And they came to Jaffa, to Machane Ariel. We had a basketball court there. And the 3 of us couldn't say anything because of the Truman embargo. So the 3 of us pretended we didn't speak English. So the 2 teams faced each other, exchanged flags, but the 3 of us didn't say anything. And Remes, who was commander of the Air Force, sat at half court, and beside him sat the American Marine colonel, who was the commander of the detachment, and the substitutes along them. And the game started. Well, the Americans were big and strong, but they weren't very good basketball players. I outscored the entire American team. I made like 22, 23 points, and we beat them 41 or 2 to 18. So near the end of the game, I'm standing at half court, and then this Marine runs into me and elbows me in the back without thinking. And they beat the hell out of me because every time I went to the basket, they just beat up. I was covered in blood, my own blood. And when this Marine elbowed me in the back without thinking, I turned around and I swore at him. And I had an extensive vocabulary from my time in Cleveland and in the Navy. And this Marine was shocked. He just stood back. And I realized I'm standing right in front of the Marine Colonel and Remus. And I looked down, the Marine Colonel's jaw drops open and Remus turned red. We finished the game, and we had a big party after the game. As I came into the party, the entire Marine team came to me. And one of the guys says, look, I know you're an American, and I know you were in the Navy. There's only someone in the Navy could swear that good. So I blew my cover.
In the heat of the moment.
Yeah. So the war ended, and they told me that there's a group that's doing training at a kibbutz in the north. And after the training, they're going to start a kibbutz in the Negev. What's the name of the group? Ein Kesef. So I was with them training this, what's it called? There's a term for it in Hebrew. Hachshara. And I'm on this kibbutz in the north, and one of the jobs they gave me was tilling the vineyards. And I have this donkey with the plow behind him, and I'm walking him through the vineyards. And the stupid donkey kept stepping on my feet. And we did that, and then I get a call to come back to the unit. The government is forming a group of machalniks to play basketball, to tour the kibbutzim. So they wanted me to be on the team. So I joined the team, and I see the Israelis have no experience in basketball. It's raw. They're shooting everything like this. So I said to the guys on the team, I'm not going to play, I'm going to coach the Israelis and try to teach them some of the fundamentals. And that's what I did with every team we played.
How long did this go on for? How long did you do this for?
Well, this was only a couple of weeks. And then I taught them how to make layups and how to
Assists,
defend and the bare rudiments. And then I went back to the headquarters, and I get a telegram. My mother came down with tuberculosis again, and she's in the City of Hope. Do you know the City of Hope? It was a huge sanitarium out in Duarte. So when I heard that, I figured I better get back home. And I didn't want to leave because I had a terrific girlfriend.
You said she's from Jerusalem or something, or that was later on?
No. That was much later on.
Okay. So you had a girlfriend?
Yeah, this girlfriend, I'm trying to remember her name. Very soft-spoken girl, beautiful girl. How did I meet her? One of the reporters who followed me in basketball fixed me up with her.
Where was she from?
She was from one of the suburbs of Tel Aviv. I don't remember which one.
Ramat Gan, Givatayim.
I don't remember which one.
Okay.
But she was very soft-spoken, beautiful girl. So I took her out a couple of times, and one of the guys says, "Do you know who she is?" I said, "Well, I know her name." Turns out she was with Etzel. She blew up several Arab villages. I mean, to capture him. After the explosion, everybody ran away. And I'm not sure how many people she had killed, but she was one of the fighters.
Did that bother you?
No, not at all. Because with me, she was very gentle. It was funny.
There was a big rift between the Etzel and the Haganah. So it was like those people.
I met several from both sides.
Yeah. Sure.
I met a couple who were sent to Africa.
Eritrea, Kenya, sure.
Right.
Sure.
So I know the story very, very well. I was very disappointed when I heard that story, because here Jews were sending other Jews to Africa. Otherwise, they'd have turned them over to the British.
Well, they did turn them over to the British. It's called the Sezon.
Mm-hmm.
It was when Haganah members were turning in Etzel and Lehi members in the British, and those people were deported to Kenya, Eritrea.
Well,
Shamir was one of them.
There were several who were executed. The ones in Acre.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not a pleasant story.
No, definitely not a pleasant story. It's definitely something that...
So, I came, July 4th, I left Israel.
1949.
49, came back to the States. And enrolled at UCLA again. And one day I pick up the newspaper and I see that these 10 guys have been indicted by the Attorney General of the U.S. for breaking the embargo.
So, please, one day you're back in LA and you read the newspaper.
Yeah, I see these 10 guys have been indicted for breaking the embargo. They were shipping aircraft engines from Hawaii to Israel. And I look, I see, I know most of the 10 guys that were
know them?
They were in Tel Aviv.
You know them from
Israel.
From Israel. Who are they? Some of them?
Oh, Hal Pace and Al Schwimmer and Leo Gardner and I don't remember all the names.
Okay. But you met Al Schwimmer in Israel?
No, I didn't meet him there, but I knew of him there.
It was a big name.
Oh, yeah. Al saved the country. Did you ever hear about the strike?
No.
Where the crews, the air crews, were heard about what they were paying the pilots, the fighter pilots, and they weren't getting nearly as much money, and they were going to go on strike. And Al convinced them not to go on strike.
In Israel or
in Israel? In Israel.
Because there are a lot of vigilantes. A lot of people were doing it for pay.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of non-Jewish people doing it for pay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So Al convinced them not to go on strike. Anyway, Al was one of the 10. And I decided I'll go down to the courthouse to see the guys.
Because it was in Los Angeles?
Yeah, it was in LA. Now, I have to go back to 47.
Okay. Before you leave.
Before I went to Israel.
Sure.
I decided to take a class in public speaking.
Mm-hmm. Always good.
It was probably the best course I ever had at UCLA. And just by coincidence, after the November 29th partition was approved, the professor said, I want you to give extemporaneous speeches. Prior to that, you had to make an outline. So this girl gets up and gives a very strong anti-Israel speech.
American girl?
American girl, originally from Lebanon. She sits down, and immediately this guy gets up and gives a very strong pro-Israel speech. Now this guy had the type of features, and when you see him, it's hard to forget him. He had a black V-neck, V hairline, black bushy eyebrows, high cheekbones. It was, you know, a different face. Never talked to the guy.
What's that?
I never spoke to the guy.
But you were in the class when he gave
I was in the class, and he gave this very pro-Israel speech. And a few months later, I was just going to Israel. Well, as I'm talking, Leo Gardner was one of the 10. He saw me and he came up and we were talking. And as I looked, they're in the process of impaneling a jury. And the two sides are taking turns knocking off each prospective juror. And I look up, I see the next prospective juror is this guy that gave the pro-Israel speech.
Did you immediately recognize him?
Immediately. So I tell Leo, I said, Leo, what was the attorney's name? Forget the attorney's name. Anyway, I said, Leo, get the attorney here immediately. Don't let him say anything. So Leo interrupts him, brings him to me, and he said, what the hell is Bill something? Anyway, he says, why are you interrupting me? And I tell him, I said, look, I don't know if this guy is Jewish or not, but I tell him about what happened in the speech class. And I said, I'm sure he's sympathetic. Keep him on the jury. He kept him on the jury. This guy, what's the term? When one juror negates the rule of the other 11, he held up, he would not agree to a guilty verdict with jail time, only if there were fines. So rather than have a new trial, they agreed to it. So the guys were fined. Oh, I have to tell you how this all came about.
Wait, so that guy made the jury?
Hmm?
He made the jury?
He hung the jury. It was a hung jury. It was an 11-1 jury.
Yeah.
He wouldn't
Against jail.
against jail.
Who was this guy?
It's in one of the stories. I don't remember his name. Clavin. His last name is Clavin.
It's not a Jewish name.
But he was Jewish. I don't remember his first name, but it's in one of the stories. So Clavin hung the jury. And the reason the whole trial came about was, you know the name Hank Greenspun?
But tell me, yes I do, but tell me.
Hank was the editor of the Las Vegas Sun. He lived in Vegas, and he had a radio station and a newspaper. And McCarran, the senator, he always clashed with McCarran. It was like a battle of wits, but McCarran
and Greenspan?
Yeah, McCarran and Hank Greenspan. It was a battle of wits, but McCarran was unarmed, or half-armed. And Hank always got the better of him. And this guy got so furious that he got the Attorney General to indict these guys.
Including Hank?
Especially Hank. Hank was the one he was after. The other 9 were just, they were all in the same group. So that's how the trial occurred. Well, they got off with fines, but they all got guilty verdicts. Al Schwimmer was pardoned, or
By Kennedy, no, or Eisenhower.
Kennedy, I think it was.
He never came back here. He was in Israel. He never.
That's right.
Right? They told him just not to come back. Right? Isn't it something like that?
I don't know if they told him. He never told me that, but
Yeah. And you met Al Schwimmer
Oh yeah,
after the trial, like where?
when I lived in Israel.
After.
Yeah,
many years.
after many years.
Yeah.
Yeah, Al was very friendly with this test pilot. God, my
Hugo Marone?
No, not Hugo Marone.
You know Hugo Marone?
Yeah, I was a member of the
I interviewed him.
Air Force, not society, but
I interviewed Hugo.
yeah, he's a nice guy.
He passed away a year ago.
A year ago?
He passed away a year ago. I interviewed him. He was just a very special guy, very unique. He was the test pilot for Mitzvah for many years after the War of Independence.
Yeah. Oh,
And then he built airports and stuff like that.
well, there were two other test pilots who I knew,
Sure.
Danny Shapira
Sure.
and Giddy Lichtman. Giddy died last year. Well, Giddy and I used to be in touch quite often.
And when you look back at your Machal experience, what do you...
It's the greatest experience I had in my life.
How?
How?
Yeah.
Well, when I look back on it, and I realize that I was part of the establishment of the country, and how it was established, under what circumstances, I feel very, very privileged, very privileged. It was a great experience. And for me, the experience between New York and Tel Aviv, the DP camps, the boat, it was...
The basketball.
Everything. Oh, and Nat Holman came. You know who Nat Holman is? He was the coach of CCNY.
What's CCNY?
After the war, City College in New York. After the war, he came to Israel to conduct a clinic, a basketball clinic. I assisted him in the clinic. Yeah. And then CCNY won both the NCAA championship and the tournament in New York, the Madison
Square Garden?
Yeah, his team won both. That was the only time one school won both championships.
And after you came back from Machal, you went back to school?
I resumed my studies at UCLA.
In business?
In business administration. And in 1948, I think it was, the Air Force, which was the Army Air Corps, became the Department of the Air Force. And when they became their own departments, in 52, I think it was, they realized they didn't have any accounting systems. So they hired one of the big eight, I don't remember which one, to design accounting systems for the Air Force. And that was accomplished in 53. And when the Air Force got these accounting systems, they came to the realization they didn't have any accountants. So they went around the US in 54 interviewing accountants. I was interviewed in LA at the end of 54, and I was selected. And the following year, I went to Ramstein, Germany, which at that time was the headquarters of the 12th Air Force. And I started my Air Force career there.
And how long were you in the Air Force for?
30 years. Well, 29 years, because I got the year of military service at it. So I was there, and I was in Europe until January of '63. Then I transferred to what was Space Systems Division in El Segundo. And I was there until I retired. And
when you retired, you made Aliyah.
yeah, as soon as I retired, I made Aliyah.
What year did you make Aliyah?
84.
And you lived there until?
2011.
Wow.
27 years.
And you played tennis?
And I played tennis.
You still play tennis?
Still play tennis. In fact, I think I was #1 in my age group in the 70, 75, and 80. And in the 2009 Maccabiah, there were 305 tennis players, and I was the only one to win 2 gold medals in singles and doubles.
And while you were in Israel in those 27 years, 27 years?
27 years.
Were you involved with any participation in Mahal or was it?
Oh, every Yom HaZikaron, there'd be a Machal reunion.
Right.
And
At Sharagai.
at Sharagai, and I'd sing Hatikva.
You would sing Hatikva?
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of the other people that I interviewed from Mahal was David Tapperson.
Migdal.
Migdal.
Wait, he died, didn't he?
Yeah. When I interviewed him, his head was already, it was 50-50, kind of. But I interviewed him, it took a few days to interview him. And a guy named Joe Black, South African guy.
Joe Black, I don't remember.
And I can't remember all the Mahal people in Israel that I interviewed. David Makarov, Mac. Do you remember him?
Yeah.
Him and his wife Frida.
I don't remember Frida, but I remember.
Mac was involved with radars, I think. And I know that he was in Machane Ariel for a while also.
Yeah?
Small guy with glasses from Atlanta, Georgia.
Did you interview Smokey?
I didn't interview him, but he was interviewed. I interviewed some people now in Jerry Gross in Montreal, and some people in Toronto, and Cy Spiegelman in New York. A lot of people.
You know, the Air Force guys, especially the fighter pilots, were a very special group. The 101 Squadron guys were a very tight-knit group, and they remained close and tight-knit after the war.
Sure.
We had a Machal group here. At the time, I was president of the group here for a few years. And at the time I made Aliyah, I think we had 83 people on the mailing list.
In 83 and 84.
83 people on the mailing list. And this was in 84.
In 84.
And it was a terrific group. We'd have dinners once every other month, and the guys loved getting together.
Sure.
We were strictly social.
Yeah.
Strictly social. And you'd hear the same stories
Absolutely.
all over.
It's like when I get together with my army friends in Israel. It's the same thing. It's the same experience.
Yeah.
You know, your generation and my generation could be different, but once you're in the army and you're going through that.
Well, especially under those conditions, it was, and it was a great group. And when I came back in 2011, first, most of the guys were gone. And the group had changed its character completely. Completely. which was very disappointing. And it's better I not say any more about it.
That's fine. That's fine.
But you'll get a lot of stories from Tom.
Well, Tom, I'm interviewing. Before I stop the camera rolling, is there anything that we didn't mention that you would like to talk about? Do you feel that there's something that I missed, or do you think?
You know, at 91 years, I'm amazed myself at the things I do remember. But I hope I'm not like my sister. My sister remembers things that never happened.
Oh, well.
And
I'm just trying to think if there's anything that we've missed that we can talk about.
I don't really know.
I think we've been kind of chronologically quite well. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn off the camera. We're going to take a little break, and then I'm going to take some pictures of.
We'll go through some of the memorabilia.
But I want to thank you very, very much for speaking to me. It's a very nice conversation.
It's a privilege. It's a privilege.
Thank you so much.